So tell me about the first sort of when you first moved into the idea of writing. How did you think that this would be a good next phase for you? Because presumably you had last done this in undergraduate as an undergraduate. How did you? What made you think that
It's very
you have
funny when
a
I was,
focus?
yes, it's very funny when I was at Harvard. I took two. You are allowed two courses outside the business school, and I took them both in the Middle East Studies Center with a professor there. His name was Nadav Safran, and I remember he reading my papers and telling me, "Why are you going into business? Why don't you take up a career in writing?" And I told him, "Well, in my part of the world, writing or politics don't have a great future. I want to be in business, really."
Hmm.
And that's where you can make more money, you can do much more, you have much more freedom than becoming a member of a bureaucracy, really. So I always had that passion. I don't remember the exact point that got me writing, but my first book was a novel. But it was really a novel of a political scenario, of a future political scenario. And it was very funny because also, you discover things with your children. When we were growing up, the world was a very simple place, and uh, you know therapy and educational help and things like that were never available to students, even at Harvard and Princeton. But I discovered with my children that I had ADD, or attention deficit disorder, which many children have, but many children get medicated for it now. So I remember I had never taken any medication for it, but there was a very famous medicine called Ritalin. And that
Hmm.
first summer, I thought, let me try Ritalin because everybody says it's good for people with ADD. And I took Ritalin and I wrote the first draft of my book in a month.
That's
So it,
amazing.
it, 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 it was extraordinary. Now, mind you, it made me very tense, and it was like drinking 100 cups of coffee a day. So I
Yeah,
never took it again.
yeah.
But I wrote the first draft in a month, really, and it was extraordinary. I took Ritalin, and it made me focus, for 10, 12 hours a day straight. And I was always bad at focus. I was always bad at attention, um, and that made me I thought, as a disadvantage in school. I still managed reasonably well, but I think had I had Ritalin in university, it would have made my life much, much easier.
Interesting. I wonder whether if you had been focused, it would have changed your decision about what to study and what to pursue. Actually, as a young adult, I wonder.
Maybe,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
that's
That's interesting.
that's a very good point. Maybe I
Very
would have gone
interesting.
on to do a PhD then.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
because yes,
Mm.
because I mean, when I look back at Princeton and Harvard, I look upon them also a bit as wasted opportunities.
Hmm.
I sometimes say that education is wasted on the young.
Yeah.
I think that I focused on gaming the system at Princeton and at Harvard to get through with a good track record by doing the minimum amount required. And I think had I not had more focus, I would have taken a different
That's
attitude.
interesting.
And
That's very interesting. Tell me about your early
yeah,
writing, Ali. You wrote your novel. What was next? Were you writing at this point articles in journals and commentating on the Middle East?
I began writing an article. Yes, all Middle East, really. I mean, that's my interest.
Yeah.
The Middle East, as I always tell people, has content. If I was going to write about Norway, the Norwegians, their worst political problems are when the Icelanders come to steal their fish,
Yeah.
and then you have headlines on Norwegian papers. Norwegian blood pressure goes up. That's the extreme of
Extent of
problems that
it.
we have.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
that's the extent of it. In our part of the world, you have content coming daily of
Absolutely.
of 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 high octane content, so
Yeah.
you never get bored.
Yeah.
And I wrote a novel about future war between the Arabs, between Iran and the Gulf, and between Israel and the Palestinians and the Arabs, a sort of perfect storm
Yeah.
that redraws the map of the Middle East. I think is still relevant today. It's called the Arabian War Games, and I worried, for example, that Iran has ambitions to invade the Gulf and control the oil fields of the Gulf. And I start my book by quoting somebody where I say that history is a series of what is the word? I mean, we always think that things are incredible or impossible to happen, or there's a term that I forget now, but something unbelievable that could happen. But actually, history is a series of unbelievable events when you think about it.
Mm.
If you go back to history, the last 20 years, 9/11, the invasion of Iraq, so many things, the election of Donald Trump. There's so many things that if you were before them, you would say that they were just beyond comprehension and would not happen. So I always think that people lack imagination, and society does, and professional society does not encourage imagination. In other words, if you are a political scientist, or even if you are a analyst in financial markets, it's much easier to go with the accepted consensus about issues, because there's a saying in Arabic that says "Al-Maut مع الجماعة رحمة." Yani, if you die with everybody else, you are blessed. So if you go against accepted wisdom, for example, if you're an analyst in Wall Street and you say that Goldman Sachs is a sell and everybody else is saying is a buy, you had better be right. But if you say it's a sell and everybody else is saying it's a sell, even if it turns out to be a right, you're with everybody else, so you look fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
The same in
Yeah.
politics.
Everyone likes
The same in
predictability.
politics.
Yeah. People
People
want
don't have,
predictability.
yeah,
Absolutely.
people don't know. People don't have imagination, and imagination is not encouraged.
Mm.
And people feel embarrassed to be imaginative, because if you're imaginative, people say, "Yaki, that's a ridiculous idea." You are bringing and bureaucrats. When you talk to government bureaucrats, for example, I mean, they're the last people on earth who are going to be imaginative, because the bureaucracy does not encourage imagination.
Mm. Mm.
So, but actually, you need imagination to try and look at potential future scenarios.
I want to just change tracks just slightly, Ali, and talk a little bit about the writing that comes out of our region or about our region. You know, we have so many writers in the West talking about the Middle East, and there are a lot of well-known commentators. If you're plugged into this world, you'll know a lot of them. The people that write for Foreign Affairs, even the commentators in many of the well-known daily newspapers. Where are the Arab writers? Where are people like yourself? Where are your compatriots, your comrades from the region? Where are they? Where is the Arab voice? Where are we making the case
Well,
for our own self? And
you see,
who are they? I mean, I don't know who they are.
we lack two things, and that will only come with time. We lack mature universities that are independent and that have history and political science departments that can write about anything they want. And there isn't a single Arab country, even Lebanon, where you have that. Maybe Lebanon was the only one for a while, but even today, Lebanon, you have to be careful about what you say in certain situations. So if you're an Arab student and you're going to go to an Arab university and study political science, you're going to have a very shallow education. The same goes for journalism. And then if you're going to work in the press, particularly if you're in the political space, you're very constrained. So we're not manufacturing these people. We will have the odd person that goes abroad that not only goes abroad and studies abroad, but retains an interest in the region. Because a lot of people who go abroad and study abroad just assimilate. If you're a bioengineer or something, you go abroad and then you find a career in America and you stay there. You have so many brilliant Egyptians that ended up in NASA and everywhere else because that they just didn't forget about their country, but their area of specialization, America satisfied that.
Yeah. The opportunities
So
are
as a
there.
result,
Yeah.
we are not manufacturing. We are not manufacturing an intellectual class yet. That will take time, and
Do you see that that is
partially
an
because we are
inevitable?
going through.
But Ali, do you think that
I
you're
mean,
saying it's a question of
you
time?
mean
Is it inevitable, or
it,
does also a civic society have to come from the ground up? I mean, surely it has to be nurtured as a
it,
as an entity in each country.
it has to be nurtured from the top down because that's the way things are being done
Yeah,
in our part of the world.
yeah.
Now, we talk a lot about freedom and democracy in the region, and I look at Saudi Arabia, which is the country that I focus on and talk about, and I tell people in the West that there when they talk about where's democracy and where's freedom in Saudi Arabia, I say that Saudi Arabia could not be managed in this part of the world, in the state that it is, without authoritarianism. And that the changes that took place in the last 5 years could not have happened if you had a society that was so pluralistic, where you had open elections. And I challenged them to give me one working model of democracy and pluralism in the Arab world, and there isn't a single one. You see, so I say that yes, there are human rights, and I think, but underdeveloped societies have a sort of Maslow's scale of needs, and your first need is security, and not many Arab countries can even supply that to them. I mean, if you go to Iraq today, basic security is missing. The second need is basic services, utilities, electricity, schools, hospitals. Iraq, again, where the Americans, set up a supposedly Jeffersonian democracy, cannot offer that. And
In your
then,
mind, Ali,
if you go,
what would a U.S. style democracy look like in the Middle East? What would be the result of that?
you see, I think it would. Well, we have it in Iraq today, where what happens was that there are two factors that end up dominating. One is money, and one is force. And what has
Mm,
happened and it also opens you up to outside infiltration. I mean,
yeah.
the Americans worry about Russian influence in the elections, but in some smaller Arab countries, it opens you up to outside infiltration. So, for example, in Iraq or in Lebanon, Iran has been able to dominate the political system and also use military coercion. And then it's an incredibly corrupt, both are incredibly corrupt societies. So you go to Saudi Arabia today, which has the same oil reserves the size that Iraq has, and look at what Saudi Arabia has done with its oil, and look what Saudi Arabia is doing with its oil today, and look at what an average Saudi gets out of it, and compare him to an Iraqi, you see, or compare him to a Libyan, or compare him to a Lebanese. If you were going to jump from a parachute from Mars 100 years ago and land in an Arab country, which Arab country would you have been the luckiest to land in? It's actually a country like Saudi Arabia, which has had 100 years of stability and continuity and gradual growth and development, because the government, it has been undemocratic and authoritarian, but as a percentage of wealth, of oil wealth that got to the people. Yes, there was corruption. Yes, there was elites that took, that did very, very well, etc. That's, yes, there was privilege, but net, a Saudi today is better off by far than an Iraqi or an Iranian or a Venezuelan or a Libyan or a Mexican. And these are, and if you go to Venezuela, it's a country that got oil 100 years ago, and it was a Western society. It benefited from all the software that Western civilization had available to it, and all the political maturity that the West had acquired over 1,000 years. So
Mm-hmm.
I find it,
Talking
so
about, yeah,
simplistic
yeah.
to talk about democracy in our region because it is premature, and we are
Yeah.
still
I
very very influenced by religion. I remember an
yeah.
Iraqi politician telling me, he said, if I give a speech, I'm lucky if I get 1,000 people to listen to me. If a prominent imam gives a speech, he'll have 100,000 people in a second listening to him.
Mm,
So
mm.
the misuse of
So
religion,
so
the
yeah.
the tribalism, the regionalism, and we see living examples. Again, I don't want to be a theorist here. I tell, give me an example of something that worked, And we have a model, we have a laboratory, which was Iraq, because America came in and did to Iraq what it did to Japan. Really, it took it over, it appointed a ruler, and then it handed it over to a democracy. It worked in Japan, it didn't work in Iraq. You see?
Mm, mm. I want to just shine a light for a moment on Saudi Arabia. I know it's your most you're very authoritative on Saudi Arabia. I have literally just returned from Saudi. I spent a few days in Jeddah. I spent a few days in Al Ula. And as you know, and some of my listeners know, I grew up in Saudi. So I spent my very young years there at a very different time from the mid 70s to the mid 80s. And what I saw this time was a very, very dramatic change in the infrastructure, the entire, the way the country looks, but on a much more fundamental level, the way Saudis are and how they've changed and how they are outward looking, excited about their country. There are so much positive things going on. But, this is a but, because with all that I saw and with I'm being extremely impressed with what I saw, and there's a lot that can be said for what's happening. I wonder whether there will always be a question mark hanging over the current um, push for the future there because of the Khashoggi thing. Whether the Western press are not letting go of this, and I don't see how, with all that's being done and all the positivity, this perception still lingers. Is it a question of time? Will it just, eventually fizzle out? I don't know, but you know, it just seems to me that this is still a major issue. And in today's woke world, which seems to be taking over every kind of conversation and has become very dogmatic, this is the focus. How do you explain that, Ali? What is your thought on that?
Yeah, I'll tell you what is behind that. Unfortunately, the Khashoggi, uh, the crime of killing Jamal, uh, um, took place under the Trump administration, and it became a partisan political issue in America. And the Democrats used it as a tool to attack the Republicans with, actually, and to attack the Trump administration with. So it entered the arena as a partisan political issue, which gave it much more traction than had it happened under Obama, for example. You see, I don't think Obama would have reacted differently than the way the Trump administration reacted. Ultimately, countries make horrible mistakes, and one murder, horrible murder, is not a trend line. Jamal's murder took place 4 years ago. The government, from the top to the bottom, apologized and recognized that it was a horrible crime. It's never happened again. So it's not like Russia, which has a sort of a rather rich track record. You even hear about Russian businessmen falling out of balconies these days. Uh, it's not like Russia now. So that got a certain amount of life because of domestic political U.S. football. A very prominent American columnist told me something actually a few months ago, which stuck. He said, uh, Deng Xiaoping in China was responsible for Tiananmen Square. But after a while, with all that happened in China, when Deng Xiaoping died, hardly anybody mentioned Tiananmen Square. So time will deal with it, and developments will deal with it. Saudi Arabia is a controversial player. The prince is undertaking, again, he's doing things going against consensus, going against accepted political wisdom. He is thinking out of the box. He is carrying out shock therapy on many levels that makes a lot of enemies, and some of them overt, some of them covert. And Khashoggi, unfortunately, was a tool that is very effective to continue to use. And I mean, I joke about Washington. I mean, I knew Jamal, and I know his family very well, and his uncle is one of my old friends. And in Washington, we used to go out and have dinner together. After he died, and he was very lonely in Washington, very lonely. That's why he got married to an Egyptian woman in Washington, and then got engaged to a Turkish woman 6 months later in Istanbul. But suddenly, the whole of Washington was Khashoggi's best friend. They were all dear old friends of Jamal. I don't think a single one of them invited him to their home for dinner, for example. But literally, you will hardly find a talking head today in Washington who doesn't say, Jamal was a dear old friend of mine and I was shattered. So the hypocrisy and the political opportunism and the virtue signaling is alive and well.
Yeah.
But time will kill it. Really.